Hello, my name is Clayton Burrows, and this is a presentation over sets in oil and gas. So per Rosen, our textbook, a set is an unordered collection of objects. The objects can be called elements or members, and they're contained inside of the set. So these elements are usually denoted with lowercase letters and sets with uppercase letters. So for example, let's consider the set of all countries in the world. Until we discover an alien civilization, or until Elon Musk colonizes Mars and declares himself the supreme ruler of Martian Muscodonia, we can say that countries exclusively exist on the planet Earth. So let country be an object with attributes such as natural resources and defined geographic boundaries. And then let Earth denote the set of all countries. And then we can say that for all country is an element of Earth. Now let's make a predicate. Let P be the country, and that P of country be a predicate that is true if a country produces oil. And then we'll add an argument to turn that into a preposition. We could say that there exists at least some country that is an element of the world where that country produces oil. And so here is a map showing all of the different oil producing countries in the world. So not all countries are a part of that list, so that we could actually think of oil nations, being a subset of the list of all nations in the world. More on sets and subsets. Per Rosen, sets can contain other sets, and so we'll let oil nations denote the set of countries that produce oil. Let OPEC be the set of countries that are a member of the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, and let other be the set of non-OPEC countries that produce oil. Then we can say that oil nations equals the set of OPEC nations and others. Note that both OPEC and others are proper subsets of the world because not all countries in OPEC will be equal. They will not be equal to the set of countries in the world. We can prove this. So for all country that is if a country is an element of OPEC, then that country is an element of the world. And there exists a country where country is an element of the world and country is not an element of OPEC. Therefore, OPEC is a proper subset of Earth. And without loss of generality, the same can be said for other. So here is some production plots to give you an idea of how many barrels are produced by each group of countries. And so the EIA, the Energy Information Administration, they keep track of this information and they report it. So this first graph is showing total crude oil production by non-OPEC countries. And then still on the same graph, but with a different label, you can see production coming from OPEC nations, Persian Gulf nations. And when we add those together, we get crude oil production for the whole world. Now, we could also think of this in terms of Venn diagrams. So Rosen defines two sets as disjoint if their intersection is empty. And that is what we have here, because a country cannot be both a member of OPEC and a member of other. But they are all countries are in the set world. So the Venn diagram below expresses that. And we could say that the set of oil nations, which we defined earlier, we can use this Venn diagram to show that that is the union of other and OPEC. So, with the exception of oil and gas that has been extracted, most oil and gas is buried underground. Now, these underground deposits tend to be found in buried basins, and since these basins are not restricted to geographic boundaries, it makes sense to think of basin as a set that contains country objects. So, for example, the Bakken, you might have heard about the Bakken. That is a very famous basin that is in both the United States and Canada. The basin extends across the border between those two countries. The Permian Basin is exclusively in the United States, and the Eagle Ford that also extends between across the country border. The majority of the Eagle Ford, the most prolific parts, are in the United States, but Mexico does have some Eagle Ford. So here's a map of the lower 48 state plays. Again, this is from the EIA. You can see some of the more significant plays there. The Bakken that I just mentioned up there and the Eagle Ford. It doesn't show that those go into the other countries, but they do. They just cut them off on this map. And you can see the Permian. That's an especially famous one right now because in the Permian it has easy access to the Gulf. It has copious amounts of acreage out in the middle of nowhere in the desert, where there's really nobody has any complaints with people drilling oil and gas wells. So the acreage is very accessible, and it's also very easy to get the oil to market. So naturally, there's a lot of activity there. You'll see that in a minute. But first, I want to talk about formations and how those relate to sets as well. So basins contain formations, which is where the oil and gas wells are drilled and then later produced. So here we have a stratigraphic representation of the Permian Basin. So the way this would be read is you look at the top left, that those formations would be closer to the surface. And they are all a part of the Permian system. And so as you move down, we see like the Yates, Seven Rivers, Queen, Grayburg. Those are formations that were actually drilled in the 20s and in the 30s because they were shallow and they were fairly accessible given the level of technology that was available at the time. And the Upper San Andreas is still a very prolific play for what's called tertiary recovery, which is beyond the scope of this presentation, but that's where you actually inject CO2 and it dissolves the oil, and then you get a mixture of CO2 and oil out of the ground. The formations we will be more interested for this presentation would be the Wolfcamp. And so the Wolfcamp, you may or may not have heard about this, but it is a very broad and prolific formation in the Permian where a lot of the modern horizontal drilling is being done. And so that's pertinent because we're going to look at some wells in the Wolfcamp here in a minute. And these are all horizontal wells, so wells that have been drilled pretty recently in the past 5 to 6 years. But first, let's wrap our mind around how this relates to sets. So basins, like I said, they contain formations. So we can think of formations as an object and basins as a set containing those objects. But now formations are also going to contain wells, which gives us an opportunity to think about sets inside of sets again. So the formation is where the oil and gas wells are drilled and subsequently produced, assuming that they are placed in productive parts of the basin. Sometimes we drill wells and they end up being unproductive, in which case they're plugged and abandoned by pumping cement into them. We don't have any of those in our sample set today. But as you'll see in a moment with SQL queries, some formations are more accessible and more productive than others, and these tend to contain more wells. So we could think of formations as sets containing well objects. So for example, consider the set of formations in the Permian Basin that contain at least 400 horizontal wells. So let PB be the set of all formations in the Permian Basin. Let PB 400 be the proper subset of PB that only contains formations with the cardinality greater than or equal to 400. So you can see here my notation, PB 400 is a proper subset of PB. PB 400 could also be expressed as the formation that is an element of PB such that the cardinality of the set formation is greater than or equal to 400. And as you'll see in my SQL query that I'll show you here in a moment, PB 400 includes the formations Bone Springs, Wolfcamp, Delaware, and Yeso. You can see I've shown the cardinality of those sets below. So I actually recorded a screen presentation of querying a database and writing a Python program to create a well object and then subsequently do some operations on that object. I tried narrating it as I was creating it, but I think my mechanical keyboard is quite clicky. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to voice over the recording here. So to start off, I'm going to connect to the database. Well, first I'll show you the data. I'm going to connect to that nmdata.db. And so I have one table in there called production, and this is the schema. And so look here at the API, that stands for American Petroleum Institute number. Every single well has one of those, and it's supposed to be a unique identifier for that well. And so we have 5,411 APIs in this subset that I got. This is actually production data for wells in New Mexico. So this is public data. This is nothing proprietary. You can actually download this data from the NMOCD. I'll put a link at the end of the video to their website. So this query here, I'm going to show the count of a distinct API grouped by formation. So you'll see how many wells are in different formations. And so what you see on the left there is cardinality of the set Wolfcamp. It contains 539 wells. And just having that schema there, so when we write a SQL query here in a minute in Python, it will be convenient. So first we're going to create a well object. So well object.py, open this up in Vim, zoom in a little bit so you can see. So I'll call this class well object. The constructor method, in Python we use init. I'm going to take API and a database cursor as arguments for my constructor. I'm going to save the API. Not going to save the cursor as an instance variable. I'm going to immediately use that and then let it be thrown away or garbage collected at Python's whim. So here's the statement. So this well object is one well. What we want to do is we want to get some information about this well and bind the data and code together. So we want to look at the production data, and which is a time series, and days and production rates. And we also want to know the formation of that well. Because here in a minute we're gonna make a subset from the set wells of Wolfcamp wells, and then we're going to make production plots for about 10 or so of those wells. So I'm just formatting my query. So whenever I pass an API, it's going to create the query appropriate for that API. And we're going to save the production. It's actually going to be production and formation into a list of tuples. Executing the statement. And I'm going to save the name of the formation. It is going to be the third element at index 2 of the first tuple. It's actually going to be in all of the tuples. We're just going to get it out of the first tuple at index 0. So we have our production saved as an instance variable, a list of tuples. We have our formation saved as a string. So I'm going to get some getter methods. We want to be able to get the formation out to see what formation this well is in when we're making our subset. Just return formation, get API, I return self.api. And we're just going to use that here in a minute to kind of print out the well number and the formation. Plot well is the method that's going to create the plot. So I'm going to use the matplotlib library for this. That's really doesn't really have anything to do in my mind with the lesson at hand, but it's just what we need to use to create a plot. So we'll call days. Days, as you saw in the query, that's going to be at index 0 in all of the tuples. So we unpack those into their own list, list of integers, actually, not date objects, list of integers. Rate will be a float, so we're unpacking that. And then that's what we're going to plot, days versus rate. It would be straight. It would be more or less a straight line in the later time region if I plotted it on a semi-log plot, but I think it looks a little neater if we just leave it as it is. So we're not going to do any transformations on the y-axis. Just real quick, set our font and label our axes. I have obsessively compulsively must label my axes because I lost points one time in a lab in undergrad for not labeling the axes. So even making disposable plots in Python, I always label them. So set a grid. Okay, we're going to save it all the pictures, little PNGs to directory. Glad we saved our API as an instance variable because we can just call it from there in that method, very convenient. And oh yeah, I need to import matplotlib as pyplot as PLT, as is tradition. All right, now we're ready to make a main method. I'm just going to drive this. So I need to import SQLite 3 so that I can connect to the little SQLite 3 database I have. I'll use the width variable so connection will automatically go into Python Oblivion when we're done using it. So we need a cursor object, and remember the cursor is part of the constructor. This table is indexed, so somebody may be complaining that, hey, you're making an unnecessary amount of calls to the database. But this is a very convenient way to do it, and it's not too much data. You'll see the program still runs pretty fast. So rather than getting all the data at once and then using dictionaries to loop through and populate the objects, I find it's a lot more convenient to go ahead and have each object get the data from a well-indexed table. So first thing we need to do here, get a list of unique APIs. So this is going to be actually a set of APIs. APIs is the set of distinct API. And that is representing the well object. Remember, the wells are objects in the set formation. The formations are objects in the set basins. I was just checking to make sure it looked right. I was missing a bracket there. Alright, so now we're going to create our well objects with a little list comprehension. So we're going to call the set wells is well with an API and a cursor for all API and APIs. So for every API element in the set APIs, we're going to dump that in to well along with the cursor, and then well is going to load the production. No error so far. Actually, you'll see in a minute, I get all the way to the end and I have one error. I almost had a perfect run with this. So we're going to create a set of Wolfcamp wells. This will be a subset of wells. This is why we wanted that get formation method. So we're going to define our formation as Wolfcamp. Wells sub Wolfcamp, so this is a proper subset of wells. It's going to be a well for well in wells if well.formation equals, well.getFormation equals the string that we have defined formation. And we'll just, real quick, we'll print our method, print out to the console. We're going to see what well, see that we got a well, see that we got a formation. Run that real quick. Yep, we get API numbers and the formation, and I didn't see anything that wasn't Wolfcamp, so it looks like everything ran right. So we have a proper subset of Wolfcamp wells. Now we're going to make some plots. Plotting is very slow, so we're only going to make plots for a few of the wells. I think I did like 10. And you may have already seen my mistake. I have a mistake in my plotting method. It's about to yell at us. Yep. I put save fit. I should have put save fig. I blame it because the T is right above the G. That was why. Now you can see it's taking a while, so it actually is saving out the pictures. We change to the navigate to that directory, and let's open up some pictures. And so this is public. Again, this is public production data from New Mexico. You can get this data from the New Mexico Conservation Division. They have a FTB website and instructions on how to get it from there. You can see it declining. You know, the wells start up really high. These horizontal unconventional wells get very high IPs, but they just drop like rocks. They do not have the sustained production power that conventional wells tend to have. And that what you're looking there is barrels of oil per month. So that one fell pretty hard, pretty fast too. This one's a little better, a little steadier decline. So anyway, that wraps up. I thought it'd be nice to create an object that would be part of a set and kind of relate this back to programming. I'm sure a lot of us are using Python, so maybe you find this helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to message me. And with that, I'll just provide some closing thoughts. Special thanks to my puppies, who were strong companions during the production of this video. I think you heard Murphy here making some comments during the programming part of this video. Certainly enjoyed making it. There are some photo credits if you would like to go find any of the photos, and again, credits to my puppies. So without any further ado, thank you for listening, and I hope you have a good evening or day, or whatever time of the day you listen to it. I hope you have a good time.